It's finally opening day. So, what are our predictions for the Cardinals this season? That's coming up on Be Shafe Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this opening day edition of Be Shafe Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you. It is the morning of Thursday, March 28th, 2024. Today's the day. The Cardinals and Dodgers do battle 3:10 Central Time this afternoon out in Los Angeles. Opening day in Major League Baseball is finally upon us. And so today on the podcast, we are simply going to give you our predictions for how we think this season's going to play out. I'll probably give you some division winners from across the league, but I'm going to break down the NL Central standings. I don't expect them to be very accurate because that is probably the division in baseball that I think is going to be the most difficult to predict. But I'll tell you what I think the Cardinals are going to do. And I'll tell you where I think they're going to land in terms of a win total and what the vibe I'm getting about this team is as we head into opening day. Appreciate you guys for joining me. I appreciate y'all who have joined me all off season on the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals Writer YouTube channel. We had a lot of fun down in spring training. All that is now in the rearview mirror, though. So if you like Cardinals content, hit that subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner of this video. Hit like on the video and comment below with your expectations for what the Cardinals will do this season. Give me your win total. I want to see it in the YouTube comments below. And if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, appreciate you as well over there. Make sure to follow or subscribe to the show, Be Shafe Daily, and rate and review. Appreciate you guys as always. It's going to be another great season on the YouTube channel. Will it be a great season for the Cardinals? Let's get right into it, as obviously the Cardinals are trying to put 2023 behind them. 71-91, a black mark on the organization. Not the type of losing that we're used to seeing in St. Louis baseball, but it's what happened, and the Cardinals spent the offseason trying to move on from that. Now, did they do a good enough job with their roster moves to make sure that ends up happening? Very quickly, as they got into the offseason and free agency, they said, look, we know the commentary was three starting pitchers, and we're going to get a quick start toward doing that. We're going to sign Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn. We're going to shore up the back end of our rotation, at least on paper. And then we're going to lock in an ace-caliber starting pitcher, sign Sonny Gray to the 3-year contract, a guy who finished second in the AL Cy Young vote last season, so he's at the top of his game, the prime of his game, and that's hopefully going to be enough to solidify a rotation that can compete. And then you take a look at what this team is offensively. They didn't really make any moves to supplement the starting lineup. Sign Matt Carpenter, sign Brandon Crawford late as more of a protective move toward making sure they've got what they need shortstop-wise in the depth arena behind Mason Wynn. Is that enough? Is this offense as constructed enough to take a step forward? It's going to have to take a step forward in 2024. Because when you look at the way things played out last year for the Cardinals, it wasn't enough, clearly. A lot of it, I think you can blame on the pitching failings for the organization. But offensively, they really ended up being more of a middle-of-the-pack team than anything that resembled one of the top offenses in the league. Now, I know a lot of the injuries that occurred down the stretch, it's different than saying, in my opinion, that injuries cost the Cardinals their season, because I think that is totally a false narrative. I think that's an easy crutch for the organization and folks like John Mozeliak to lean into, because they can give you the stats of how many people ended up on the injured list and how many games were missed in total. But, man, at the end of the season, you had Arenado and Wilson Contreras and Brendan Donovan. Some of those were serious injuries. Donovan had surgery, we know. But a lot of the other guys that ended up on the IL, and you had just a bunch of random dudes playing for the final few weeks of the season. First of all, the season was already lost by that point. And secondly, I think some of those injuries were, you know what, because the season is lost, we'll put you on the shelf. We'll have you rest up for the offseason and get an early start on looking ahead to 2024. So it's not like the injuries that happened in September where a guy has a hangnail and he's on the IL to end the season. It's not necessarily the case that, well, injuries really cost the Cardinals. No, the season was gone by then. The season was gone by August 1 when they had, committed to trading away the expiring pitching assets, which is a move that we agreed with. It's a move that on the podcast we said was the right thing at the time because that Cardinals team was not going to compete. There's a lot of reasons for why 2023 went bad, but the reality by August 1 was that it wasn't going to be their year. So when you look at the pieces they were able to acquire for Montgomery and Flaherty, Jordan Hicks, right? They picked up some interesting pieces that hopefully we see at some point in 2024. Guys like Thomas Saggese. Maybe we at least see a step forward from Tekoa Roby that could put him on the radar by midseason. Might be a little bit of a lofty expectation or a hope, but I think it's a possibility. The Cardinals picked up some guys that could potentially help them out here. Sim Robertson, Kloffenstein. We'll see what those guys do. But it was the move that they had to make at the time. But when you look at the offense in totality from last season, Cardinals finished with a 742 OPS, which ties them for 13th in baseball with the Orioles and Padres. Technically, the Cardinals were listed below on MLB.com, so maybe they were 15th. Like decimally, the Cardinals might have fallen a little bit behind those other teams, but basically smack dab middle of the pack in OPS. And I like to look at OPS because I think it's a good sort of catch-all way to measure, in a very simplistic way, offense. On base plus slugging percentage, what'd you do? Cardinals were middle of the pack. Runs scored, they were even worse. 19th in the league in runs scored, which is bottom half and not as robust as the OPS. Like if the OPS would directly translate to their ranking in runs scored, then that would be, about a fair thing. But they were below that. 719 runs scored, 19th in the league, because they weren't a very clutch team last year either, right? They didn't seem to be able to always come through with the key hit when you needed it. And I could change the split here to measure specifically what the Cardinals did with runners in scoring position. I'll go ahead and do that. Batting average with runners in scoring position, Cardinals finished 22nd in Major League Baseball with a 247 average. I think the OPS was a little bit higher. They're 13th in OPS, which would be basically like they would hit for extra bases maybe when they would get a hit. But that's not always, it's great. It's great to have an extra base hit with runners on because it means you're scoring maybe multiple runs. But the notion that when they just needed to scratch across one, typically they weren't as adept at doing it as other teams, 22nd in batting average with RISP. That was a problem for them last year. So what is this offense going to be? Without really upgrading it in the offseason, I think generally people have a pretty good bit of faith in what the Cardinals offense could be this year, despite the fact that they really didn't do much to address it in the offseason because you feel like you've got guys coming back that can form your core. And when we look at the lineup, lineup's not out as of this recording. Maybe it will be by the time you guys listen to it if you're gearing up for the game with some B-Shafe Daily. But I'm going to look at it and predict something to the effect of, as I grab out my Post-it note here to write down my opening day lineup prediction. In the first slot, I wrote BFD. Brendan Donovan leadoff. Think he'll be your left fielder. Goldschmidt, number 2. Gorman batting 3rd. Arenado 4th. Contreras 5th. I think that's all probably pretty much obvious and locked in. And I am going to say with Donovan in left, you'll probably have Gorman at second base. Batting 6th. If this were the home opener at Busch, I would say for sure it's Matt Carpenter. Otherwise, you could maybe make a case for Burleson. And personally, I would go Alec Burleson today as the designated hitter. Ollie may go Carpenter, and the reason that I believe he may go Carpenter is because last Sunday, the final Grapefruit League game, we did see that alignment with Carpenter batting 6th and being the DH. Carpenter had a 1,000 OPS in Grapefruit League play this year. He had a really good spring. Burleson did as well, a 940 some odd OPS. Guys are kind of in a similar role on the roster, right? Would have been a redundancy if we didn't see all the outfield injuries. Burley can at least play defensively in the outfield. Carpenter, that's not really going to be part of his bag of tricks. So I think the one reason I would go Burleson today is because you're facing Tyler Glass now, who's got a pretty uppity fastball. And I think Burleson just might have a better time making contact with that. But I don't know if the Cardinals are going to count Carpenter out before the season begins because he did have a really strong spring. Like I said, home opener, Carpenter is an obvious choice because it is a little bit more about the fanfare. Opening day in L.A., it's about trying to win the game. I think Burley would be a better choice. I'm not going to go crazy if it's Carpenter, and I am going to formally predict that it will be Carpenter. And we're going to see Walker batting 7th in right field, and then I think you go Win 8 and Victor 9th. A lot of people saying, well, could Victor Scott be your leadoff man? Sure. I think because of how ingrained Ollie Marmol is to the opening day lineup and where he kind of figured everybody would be, I think you're not going to see it that way. That's not the only reason. I also think that, look, Victor Scott had a 770 OPS or whatever in spring, had a nice spring for sure, but not necessarily robust enough that I think they're gonna vault him to the top of the lineup, because you would end up pushing Donovan down, Gorman down, one of the two, which I think would not be the end of the world. And he is a lefty, so like the construction of the lineup, left right at the top would still fit with Victor Scott batting leadoff instead of ninth. I think it makes a little bit more sense. The other side of that, though, I like Victor Scott ninth because I think the ability to get him on base and have him steal a base for the top of the order is really nice. It is possible they will transpose my prediction of Wynn and Victor eighth and ninth, because Victor is a lefty. And so that would allow you to basically go left, right through the entire lineup. Donnie left, Goldie right, Gorman left, Nato right, Contreras right would be the only spot that you don't have it doubled up. And then Carpenter left, Walker right, Victor eighth would be left, Wynn right would be ninth. I think Victor's speed, and Wynn could steal you base too. I would rather probably see it go Victor ninth, but I could also see him do it the other way. Not a big deal either direction. So, like, that's what your lineup looks like. It's a very interesting lineup. I think when you get Lars Nootbaar in there, for me, that would push Contreras down to 6, and then you would have either Gorman 5 or Nootbaar 5 with the other batting third, and then you'd have your left, right, all the way down through really to Jordan Walker's spot at the 7 hole, and then you can decide what to do with the 8th, 9th, whether it's Wynn, whether Victor Scott is still in the mix at that point when Nootbaar returns. What they end up doing as far as that's concerned will be, we'll see when we get there. But I think it is a good lineup. On paper, like, I think Brendan Donovan, above average. Right? This is a guy that, for his career, has had an OPS plus of, I'm going to guess, like 110, 115. Let me take a look so I can give you the accurate total. It was 115 last year. He's a 120 OPS plus for his career. We know what Paul Goldschmidt is. Nolan Gorman, if he can stay healthy this year, and I know that John Denton wrote about the popcorn thing. Everybody was kind of having some fun with that. Look, if that's real, then that'd be great. 112 OPS plus to this point in Nolan Gorman's career. He was 117 last year. And when I bring up OPS plus, for those that are unfamiliar with the stat, it is basically a stat that measures offensive performance. League average is 100, and above that is percentage-wise against the rest of the league that you're better. Below it, percentage-wise against the league that you're worse. 117 means you're 17% above league average compared to the rest of the league. Nolan Gorman, 27 home runs last year, didn't have, he only had 464 plate appearances. If Gorman finds 550 plate appearances and is feeling a little bit healthy compared to just having the nagging back things bother him last year, guy's going to hit 35-plus. In the home run category. He's just going to, because the raw ability's there. And even last year when he had an 805 OPS, we saw Nolan Gorman have times where he just would go into slumps. And for him, I think it's about, everybody's going to have a slump, but for him, can he make it a 4 or 5 day slump instead of a 2-week slump? Can he find a way to mitigate some of those struggles, be an everyday player, right? Like, even against left-handed pitching, I think that's going to be a key for him this year. Can he hit to the extent that the Cardinals are not looking for reasons to take him out of the lineup in a platoon capacity? Because when you look at when you look at Brendan Donovan and Lars Nootbaar, left-handed hitters that I don't think the Cardinals look at and go, you can't expose him to left-handed pitching. They'll play those guys every day. If Gorman can be somebody that they're comfortable playing against lefties, and then he can continue to actually make good on that decision and produce, Cardinals are going to have something there. And he's not always going to be your number 3 hitter necessarily if Nootbaar's healthy. Maybe he will be if he gets off to a hot start and hits for power. But, Nolan Gorman, above average. There's no question about that. As a rookie, 22 years old, held his own, 104 OPS plus, 117 last year. No reason he can't be 120 plus, 125 plus this year. We know what Arenado is and can be. Had a down year last year, but really it was just the latter portion that really stung him. Mid-season, he still had like his normal 850 OPS or whatever it was. So Arenado being Arenado, it has to happen. We're taking it for granted a little bit because we've always known it to be true. If we're going to have this conversation about can the Cardinals be the offense they need to be. Arenado has to be himself. It's a given. It's a prerequisite. Same thing for Paul Goldschmidt. Contreras, his first season was narratively discussed in a lot of different ways, not all of them positive, but I think if you're just looking at his offensive numbers, and look, we've talked about a lot of the stuff that happened was not necessarily his fault. We weren't fond of it, but if you just look at the offense, he was exactly as advertised. He came as advertised. 826 OPS for Wilson Contreras was the highest he's had since his 2019 All-Star season with the Cubs. Higher than he had in 2022. The Cardinals signed him off of that 22 season, and he came to the Cardinals and hit even better than he did. So you know what you're going to get. 124 OPS plus in the middle of your lineup. He's going to be what he is. And I think this year he's going to be a little bit more freed up to be his Wilson Contreras self all the time and not have to be carrying the weight of my pitchers are talking crap about me and nobody knows the full story. Like that, I think he's going to have a really nice season. And sure, you can look at the positive side for all these guys. I get that. There are downsides to, what if Nato isn't Nato? What if Goldie doesn't bounce back? What if Gorman just kind of can't really get over the hump on injury? But I'm looking 1 through 5 and going, yeah, I think you've got something here. Carpenter is your DH today. Again, I don't think he always will be. I think when you get Nootbaar back, it looks more like Gorman is your DH, or Donovan on a given day could be your DH, or Jordan Walker on your given day could be a DH, and then Nootbaar kind of slides into your outfield mix, and then it's, Nootbaar in left or Nootbaar in right, Donovan in left or right, whatever the case might end up being there. So if you don't love Carpenter in the lineup or Burleson in the lineup on the opening day roster, think of it in terms of Nootbaar being there eventually. And I will say this, I think Lars Nootbaar may be one of the most important hitters to the Cardinals this year in terms of their ability to reach their potential. If their potential is to be considered as a division winner and a team that can make some noise in the playoffs, Lars Nootbaar has got to, I don't know if he's got to be better than he was, but he's got to be healthier than he was. I know he's starting the year on the IL. Last 2 years for him, 2022 was kind of the year that he burst onto the scene a little bit, and that was the year where through the first month he was hitting like 200 or maybe even less. Finished with a 788 OPS, though. We saw the on-base combined with a little bit of pop, 14 home runs and 347 plate appearances. This past year, injuries plagued him, was injured on opening day, and only ended up with 503 plate appearances, and only hit 14 home runs in those 503 plate appearances. So had 150 extra PAs compared to 2022, but hit the same exact amount of home runs. Stole 11 bases, which was more than he did in 2022. But Lars Nootbaar, I think you need him to hit 18 or 20 home runs. I think you need him to steal 15 bases. I think you need him to maintain that on base, which was 367 last year, which is perfect. I don't really need to see a different batting average. 261, 367, that's perfectly adequate, more than adequate. But for a Lars Nootbaar who could maybe develop into one of the game stars of the day, that's what the Cardinals are hoping to see. I think you want to combine that 367 on base that he had last year with the 448 slug that he had in 2022, because his slug dipped to 418 in 2023, 30 points lower than the previous season. If you add up 367 on base with a 448 slug, that's going to get you to about 815 on the OPS. That's what the Cardinals really need, I think, from Nootbaar this year. If we're going to talk about this as like a top offense, which I don't know, I've said top 5 is what they need to be. I need to see top 5, because if I were to rank the rotation, which we'll get to in a minute, I don't think you're going to see a top 10 rotation. I don't know if you're going to see a top 15 rotation. You might. Hopefully you will. But with Sonny Gray starting on the IL and the knowledge that injuries don't just stop when the season begins, is that something that this rotation as constructed is going to be able to provide? We don't know. But I do think Lars Nootbaar, even though he's not going to be out there on the field today, he is crucial to the Cardinals this season, because everybody loves Newt, but can his production really lock in and match up to that? The consistency of his production, which I don't really mean to say he's been bad. He's just not been on the field quite enough. And you want to see a little bit more pop in that bat. Lars Nootbaar, potentially a big year incoming, made the changes in the offseason to try and drive the ball more. Can we end up seeing that on display for the Cardinals whenever he's able to get healthy? And then moving down the lineup to number 7, Jordan Walker. What are we going to see from Jordan Walker this season? Because you look at a guy that last year came up at age 20, played most of his season at age 21. He will turn 22 in May. A 787 OPS, so a couple points higher than Nootbaar last year. Man, this guy at 21 did some amazing things. 16 home runs, 465 plate appearances, only 100 strikeouts, which everybody strikes out 100 times. You'd like to see maybe Walker be able to have 100 strikeouts in a full season rather than kind of 2/3 of a season or 4/5 of a season, whatever it ended up being. 465 PAs is a decent amount, probably 3/4 of a season. But 276 average, 342 on base, and a 445 slug. Did that as a 20 and 21-year-old. 787 OPS. I think above 800 would be a great goal for his OPS this year. If he just locks it in and says, yep, I got that kind of rookie season under me and I can take a year two leap, sky is the limit for Jordan Walker, and he's batting 7th in this lineup. Whatever you imagine Jordan Walker's somewhat reasonable year two potential to be, if he hits on that, Jordan Walker is the best number 7 hitter in Major League Baseball in any given lineup, batting 7th. I don't think there's any question about that. The potential that he has is tremendous. And it's not like he was a bum last year. 787 OPS is hanging, man. That's better than hanging in there. His OPS plus was 114. If you recall, I said that Gorman's, as a rookie, 22 years old, was 104. Doing it at like a year and a half younger was Jordan Walker, 114. 120, 125. Again, you might have a lineup 1 through 7 of guys that can go 120 on their OPS plus, 20% above league average. And then you look at the bottom 2 slots in the order. Mason Wynn is an offensive question to me at this point. After what we saw this spring, I don't think it would be fair to just say, yeah, you can pencil him in for a league average offensive season. I think it's probably going to be more like a 90 to 95 OPS plus, but he was a 29 OPS plus in the 137 PAs that he had late last season for the Cardinals at 172. He's got to do more than that. I think he can and will do more than that. This spring was kind of a lackluster performance for him. 638 was the OPS with a 227 batting average and played a fair bit. But I think Mason Wynn's going to lock it in. I'm not worried about it yet, especially when you consider he's going to bat 8th or 9th. So I think Mason Wynn can certainly, but if he can give you league average to go along with everybody else kind of doing the things that we have described, 115 to 120 OPS plus for the bulk of them, Wynn gets you 95 to 100 on OPS plus, which would look probably like a Tommy Edman typical production, like a 99 OPS plus with a 700 OPS, 690 OPS, something like that. You can take that from Mason Wynn if he's giving you a sterling shortstop defense. Because the thing that was kind of overlooked last year and why I think the pitching staff was so bad, it was a pitch-to-contact group that didn't have a good defense or a consistent defense behind it. Mason Wynn should hopefully help shore that up, as should, at least at the beginning, Victor Scott II, who will be starting in center field today. I really think anything he gives you offensively is a bonus. I'm not going to nitpick the offensive production of Victor Scott as long as when he is getting on base, he's getting the extra base. I'm giving him the green light as much as possible. Situationally, of course, be responsible with that. But he has 770 OPS in spring. Man, if he can, and with a 317 batting average, a 404 on base. So the fact that he had some plate discipline to take 5 walks as well in those 47 plate appearances. Didn't strike out a ton, only 7 strikeouts. Put the ball in play, kid, and let the speed do the work and steal some infield hits and then turn them into doubles and then allow the guys at the top of the order to drive you in. That needs to be the game plan. If he can hit 270 with a 330 on base and basically no power, 340 slug, that's a 670 OPS. That's not anything that you think is too great. I think it works for where he'll be batting in the order, and so that's really all I would hope to see from him. Anything you get on top of that is a bonus. But the center field defense has to be sterling, and I think it will be from Victor Scott. Get that defense solidified, and it's going to help out this rotation. What do I think that Cardinal lineup ends up looking like? And, of course, you'll get Edman back at some point and Carlson back at some point. I think it's a top 10 lineup. I think it needs to push to be closer to top 5 in runs scored to really be able to sustain what they're hoping to do win-wise when you take a look at the rotation. I think Sonny Gray is going to be a legitimate bona fide ace when he's ready. Beyond that, what are you getting from the rest of this rotation? And it's not that Sonny Gray is just a given, but like if we're talking about, hey, how do we mentally construct this Cardinals team to be one that, that really is competitive and can make a charge in not only the division but the league, you almost have to just say it's a given that Sonny Gray is going to be good. We can't spend too much time going, well, if he's bad, what's the line when it comes to NFL coaches? I think it was like Peyton Manning's coach or one of those big-time quarterbacks where somebody asked, like, why don't you give the backup quarterbacks any reps in practice? And he said, well, if 18 goes down, we're blanked, and we don't practice blanked. So if Greg goes down, you're blanked, which I get it. He's down right now, so that's not really what Cardinals fans want to hear. But there's no use spending time thinking about blanked. And you can fill in the blanks mentally as you will. But I think Gray will be good. What about behind him, though? What about behind Sonny Gray? Michaelis, I think, is probably your number 2. What's Miles Michaelis going to give you this year? He threw 200 innings last year, but the ERA was inflated, 4 point whatever. This year, he's had a really good start to, the fake season. He had a good spring, 4.78 ERA. It was a run and a half higher than the previous year when he was an all-star. Had a 3.29 ERA in 2022. 3.29 to 4.78 is not the jump you want. In the defense of Michaelis, here's why I say he'll be better this year than he was last year. In 2022, when he had that great all-star season, a 3.29 ERA, his fielding independent pitching, and I'm not a FIPster all the time, but I think it's kind of relevant to tell you how a team's defense is from year to year. Typically, the Cardinals have just been a great defense, and so FIP hasn't always concerned me as much because I think they had a style of baseball that could overcome a poor FIP most years. And in 2022, Miles didn't have a poor FIP. It was 3.87. Beat that by about a half a run with a 3.29 ERA because the Cardinals still in 2022 were in their kind of defensive prime. 2023, the defense kind of fell off the way, and Miles had a 4.78 ERA, a run and a half higher, right? The FIP, though, was only 0.4 runs higher. It went from 3.87 to 4.27. So instead of outperforming his FIP by half a run, he raised the FIP by less than half a run, and he underperformed his FIP by half a run. So that's a swing of that's how you get your run and a half. You're about a half run worse, and instead of being a half run better because of the defense, you're a half run worse because of the defense. You're a run and a half worse. That's how you get from 3.29 to 4.78. It's not all the defense's fault. There's some location things that Michaelis has worked on to try to get better and try to get back to where he was in previous seasons. But I will say, I think a lot of what happened is like, man, the defense really let him down. And so that played out in the numbers. And now you see a 2.14 ERA in 21 innings this spring. He's never going to be a huge strikeout guy, 15 Ks in 21 innings this spring. If he could be, get him back to 3.29 and you're doing a dance about what this rotation could potentially do as a result. But even just get Michaelis to like a 3.5, a 3.8, 3.9 ERA, I think that would be really, really helpful compared to what happened last year. And then you take a look at Lance Lynn. What is Lance Lynn going to bring to the table for the Cardinals this season? It's a good question. He has 7.9 ERA in the spring. Like, you're going to look at the other 3 starters we're going to talk about before you get to Thompson. None of them had good springs. Gibson, a 7.8 ERA. Matt's 8.16. Lance had a 7.90. Limited sample for all of them, but not a good spring for any of them. But you did see Kyle Gibson shove in his last start, 5 innings, 9 strikeouts. That's what you want to see. I don't know that you're always going to see it, but he really dialed it in. So that's good to see. Lance Lynn, what's he going to give you? Last year was not a good year at all for Lance Lynn. Cardinals signed him off of that year anyway. He had a 6.5 ERA with the White Sox. We've talked about maybe the White Sox were just such a bad environment that, that nobody was really going to thrive there. But could Lynn have been part of the fix instead of, not say he was part of the problem, but with ERA like that, you're not exactly the solution. I don't know. He goes to the Dodgers and has a 4.3 ERA, doesn't strike out as many batters, but was able to kind of hone it back in and look more like he had looked previously. Lance Lynn, for like the previous 4 years before that, had an ERA below 4 and had an all-star season mixed in there where he had a 2.69 ERA. That was 2021. I know that was, he's 37 now compared to being 33, 34, but that's kind of the differential here. So is it possible for Lance Lynn to get back to anything close to resembling that all-star season that he had 2-3 years ago? If he could just get to a 4 ERA, I think that would be good enough. Can he do that? Well, we'll see. Can Kyle Gibson, what's he going to be? He's been a 4.5, 4.7 ERA kind of guy. Probably going to be right in that range toward the back end of your rotation. That can end up being okay as long as there aren't too many games where he just blows up on you. Steven Matz, we know, is a wild card, and based on what we saw this spring, fair to be a little bit concerned. But then maybe there is some upside still in this rotation with a guy like Zach Thompson. Can Zach Thompson, who had a 2.6 whatever ERA this spring, 2.81 ERA this spring, in 16 innings pitched, 14 strikeouts, can Zach Thompson be a guy that actually resembles better than a number 5 in your rotation? And then if he's doing that and somebody else is struggling, do they have a quick hook? Do they put Steven Matz into the bullpen kind of like they did last year if Sonny Gray gets back and he's not looking right and Zach Thompson's looking good? Because both are a lefty, that would seem to be an absolutely possible transition that could happen. I'm talking about within a couple weeks. I mean, if Matz has 2 bad starts and Thompson has 2 great ones and it's time to find a spot for Sonny Gray, I wouldn't be surprised to see that almost immediately because the Cardinals have to take this season seriously. They know they have to win this year. Do they have to? Well, no, but there's pressure to do so, and I think there should be consequences for not doing so. So that's something that you could see. What would I predict for the rotation? I don't know. It's going to be 15th through 18th to 20th, something like that in ERA, if I had to guess. There's upside, but not a ton of it, at least that we see on paper, so I'm a little bit skeptical. I'm a little bit worried about the idea that your best pitcher is already injured, so where does that leave you if you have another injury? Again, injuries don't stop just because the season starts. So if it's a middle-of-the-pack rotation, you're begging the offense to be top 5, top 6, top 7. Bullpen, I think, could be pretty good. We've got Ryan Helsley. I'm going to read off the relievers because that was officially announced on Wednesday for those who haven't seen. Ryan Fernandez did make the team, Rule 5 guy, so had a good enough spring in their eyes to put him on the roster. We'll find his stats. 3.72 ERA in 9 innings. Not much in the way of strikeouts, just 6 strikeouts in 9 2/3, but good enough when you're going to get the roster spot if you're a Rule 5 guy. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily the way it should have gone, but I also know with injuries, there weren't a ton of guys that were just beating down the door to take the spot. I don't think there was any major snubs from the bullpen mix, so I think that's perfectly fine to have Fernandez on the team and give him a look. Gallegos, Helsley, Kittredge, Liberatore is going to be a lefty in your bullpen. Riley O'Brien makes the team as we said he would a month and a half ago. Palante's on the team. Jojo Romero is the other lefty in the bullpen. And Palante, remember, he has good reverse splits, so he can come up against lefties and do a nice job. That's your bullpen. Keenan Middleton on the IL to begin the season. Also on the IL, we'll give you the full IL. Dylan, Tommy, as you know, Sonny Gray, Lars, Keenan, and Drew Rom, also on the injured list, would not have made the active roster anyway, I don't think, because he'll be a AAA starter when he does return. So if Helsley is himself and Gallegos is himself and O'Brien's spring gains look like they're real, and he turns into a setup guy that you can trust, this could be a top 12, top 15 bullpen, and there is upside always with a bullpen to surprise you. Like JoJo didn't have a great spring, but if he goes back to being himself and Liberatore turns into Andrew Miller, then suddenly you're like, wow, they're 5-6 deep in guys that they really trust. And then you've got Palante as sort of a utility knife to get you a double play ball. Ryan Fernandez will, get his opportunities and be kind of in the low leverage role, I would imagine, from the right side to begin things. But if the offense carries the team, that's how it works. Like the way I've described it, middle of the pack rotation, maybe that's even being optimistic. Bullpen can be top half of the league with room for helium to grow from there, but that still puts you in the middle of the pack as a team unless there's an element that takes you above, and that's the position player group. That's the offense being top 10, top 8, top 5, and the defense as well, I think needs to be and can be a top 10 defense. I know that's maybe a crazy prediction after last year, but you look at the changes. Victor Scott in center, Tommy Edman coming into center field eventually when he does, if Victor's not hitting. I think you're more stable there defensively than you otherwise would have been. Hopefully Walker is better than he was last year. If not, you may have to consider pulling the plug on that experiment within the season and saying, yeah, he's either a DH or something else on the infield for you. But I do think he can at least be better. He was rough last year. Hopefully he's made strides by working on it all off season, and we'll see how that ends up playing out at game speed. Mason Wynn at shortstop, I think, can help you. I think Gorman is a capable enough second baseman, and I think he's gotten better. His arm strength is really impressive. Double play turns, I'm not worried about with him at second base. Donovan's going to move around, but I think he can play a very good second base as well. Let's see Arenado have another Gold Glove season. I know Brian Hayes kind of took the mantle from him and can be expected to just keep it the way Nolan did for a decade, but maybe Arenado can reach back and show again what he is defensively and at least be a finalist for the award and have that sort of season. And then Goldschmidt, I think also, hopefully with better defenders around him, he makes fewer mistakes and ends up being sterling again defensively. And then I think Ivan Herrera, when he catches, is gonna be an interesting guy to watch. Hopefully he can have a really nice defensive year, and Contreras has been working. I'm a little skeptical that, he's going to be all too different, wildly different than what he has been for his whole career, because he's pretty deep into his career now. You don't just suddenly go, yeah, I'm going to work on my defense, and then suddenly you're great at age 32, 33, whatever. So I think he can be fine. But you look around the diamond, Newbar in left can be a Gold Glove caliber left fielder, I believe. We'll see if he ends up turning into that. But this could be a defense that's top 10. You put that all into the bag, Cardinals fans, put it all together, whatever you get. It's, I'm a little skeptical. I am a little skeptical that this is going to just turn into the 88-win season, 86-win season that could make you comfy and confident that they're going to win the Central. On the big show on KTGR yesterday, we did our predictions. I think in the American League, I went with Orioles, Twins, and Astros, with the wild card teams being Yankees, Tampa Bay, and the Rangers, which was difficult to leave out Seattle. That was one that I said, I'd like to find room for them, but you can only pick so many. And Toronto, I left out those two. And then in the National League, I think Dodgers and Braves are obvious. I think the Phillies can maybe push for a wild card out of the East. They've got enough. I mean, their top-end pitching, they've secured it with Nola and Wheeler if they stay healthy. Their lineup is fine. It's not amazing, but they've still got like Trey Turner, Bryce Harper. They've got some stars still. Schwarber, Castellanos. I think they're going to end up being enough to make the playoffs. I think the Marlins maybe miss. I don't think the Mets are going to have the depth of pitching after they didn't really do a ton to impress me in the offseason, but they could be, they're a team that could be around 500. The Marlins could be around certainly 500 and make a push. I think the Nats will actually be a little bit better than people think. They're not going to lose 100 games again, maybe like 70 wins. And I view the Pirates similarly. The Pittsburgh, I know that they had more than 70 wins last year. Cardinals were last in the division. But Pittsburgh could be like 75 they could really push for 80 and make the division really, really interesting in the Central. Out West, I have a hard time picking those wildcard teams because I think the Diamondbacks rotation is lethal. They've added Jordan Montgomery. He won't be ready right away, but they'll have a good 1 through 4 at least when they do. And even I think Brandon Pfaadt might be their number 5. So they'll have a pretty good chance. The Giants, though, did the same thing. I mean, they had Blake Snell. That NL West, pitching-wise, is pretty nasty. The Padres, I mean, have expectations of getting back, but they also traded Juan Soto away. So it's like, are we really buying that you're going to be able to do it? If anybody can do it, it's Mike Schilt. I believe in him as a manager. But again, I could see the Padres being a 500 team. I could see those two other teams, the Dodgers winning the division, obviously, but the D-backs and the Giants being above 500 with a potential for the wild card. I don't think the NL Central gets a second playoff team. I just think there are too many teams that I have more faith in the East and West to be able to, even just on a median expectation, make a push. But on the big show yesterday, at first I thought, well, I'm not going to pick the Cardinals to win the division because the day before that, on low-hanging fruit with Charlie Marlowe, I said 82 wins for the Cardinals. I am a little skeptical that this plan is just going to come together splendidly. Now that I'm getting the juices of opening day being today, I am going to raise that by 1. I'm going to say 83 wins for the Cardinals. And this is subject to change, of course, because I do have faith that the team can be pretty good. I have faith that the division can be not that good. But what if one team from the division just surprises us and wins 90 and puts it out of reach of what we expect the Cardinals to do, and then the other teams in the NL take the wild cards by winning upper 80s, and the Cardinals are like, well, 84, 85 is now suddenly not enough to make the playoffs. I don't know if I would predict that to happen, but what if the Reds' young pitching all steps forward at the same time and their position players kind of do the same? Now, Matt McClain's out. Like, they've got injuries they're already dealing with, so that could hurt the Reds for sure. And I think it will hurt them enough to where I'm not going to predict them to win because they've got 2 pitchers, too, on the IL. They've got a 5 that works, but Brandon Williamson, Nick Lodolo are on the IL to start. So I'm not really diving in on the Reds the way I thought I would be, but 79, 80 wins seems super plausible. I know I'm saying like half the league is going to be 500, and then there are obviously the good teams that are going to gobble up a lot of wins, so this can't possibly happen. Something is going to have to give. But I'm looking at a lot of these teams, and other than like the Rockies, I don't really loathe anybody in the National League. The Nationals are going to struggle a little bit still, but they've got young players that are interesting too. So, if they win 70 games and the Rockies, can they lose 140? Like everybody can beat the Rockies to pad these records that I'm envisioning for the other NL teams. I don't know. But in the NL Central, like I was getting to the point where I said I'm not going to pick the Cardinals, and then I was talking through it, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to pick the Brewers. I do think they take a step back, and they could be deadline sellers that do also lose like 90 games. I know that all they really did was trade Burns, and the reason for doing it was because they knew they couldn't re-sign him, and they still have a decent amount of talent on that team. Jackson Chourio is going to come up, be a Rookie of the Year candidate, but I just don't think they quite have enough anymore, especially with the first half injury to Devin Williams. I think Brewers finished either 4th or 5th in the division. It's either them or the Pirates in last. I don't think there's a Central team that loses 100 games. Last year, 91 was last place in the Central. We talked about how bad this division was all year, and then nobody lost, nobody even won fewer than 70 games. So I think that could happen again, where 68, 69, 70 could be the low watermark in the Central. Brewers or Pirates in that spot. I think Pirates could get up to 76, 77. Like, they've got some interesting pitching that, if it can carry them, like Jared Jones is a guy that made their rotation, impressed in spring. Pirates, 75, 74, 75. Give me 70, 78, 77, it's 78, 79 for the Reds, something like that. And I guess then by default, that leaves the Cardinals and Cubs. Isn't that the way everybody would have it? And I figured I can't take the Cubs. That's what I eventually talked myself out of picking against the Cardinals in the division, is because I can't really take the Cubs. So while I'm not thinking the Cardinals are going to blow this division out of the water with a high win total necessarily, I look at the Cardinals being like 82, 83, 84, and the Cubs being more like 80, 81, 82. So by a nose, I am going to take the Cardinals to win the division over the Cubs. I've never been less confident in a prediction of how this NL Central is going to go. If this were statistics class, I would say my confidence interval on this is very, very low, because I think it could just go a variety of ways. I would even leave room for the Pirates to win this division. I don't think it's very likely, but it's not impossible. It's impossible that we are proclaiming the Brewers dead before they really are. And maybe they just are fine as the team that won the division last year. Maybe they're fine. I don't think they're fine, but maybe I'm wrong. The Reds, like I said, maybe the injuries crush them and they lose 90 plus, or maybe they pull it together and they win 90. I think of the teams that could win 90, the Reds are higher on the list than the Cardinals, but I think the Cardinals have a better median expectation. And then the Cubs, like, it's really going to come down between the Cardinals and the Cubs. I think who does more at the deadline? Who wants it more? The answer should be St. Louis, but the Cardinals have been deathly afraid of making trades that they think can come back to haunt them. And then almost by having that sort of gun-shy nature, when they do seems pull the trigger on one, they end up regretting it later. And it's almost destiny at this point. It's like the prophecy that they're going to, because it's self-fulfilling with the way they treat trades sometimes. But I think this is going to be a deadline where if you're in the mix, you've got to say, what do we need and how do we get it? And don't ask questions about what it does to the future. If you're serious about winning, if you're serious about just being in the mix and being able to tell the fans, like, hey, we're competitive and that's nice and we can put butts in seats, if that's the priority, then that's fine. You can dilly-dally at the deadline and win 82, 83, and maybe it's enough. It's probably not, because these predictions are based on the rosters I see now. The teams that are in the mix are going to really go in, and then that Central team is going to win 86 and probably get the division that way, 85, 86. So we'll see what ends up happening, Cardinals fans, but I've got the Cardinals around 82, 83 wins, maybe 84 wins, which I think is a number that can be boosted to 86 or so with what they could do at the trade deadline. If they're in that mixture, a couple games above 500, they could finish strong. What do you think the Cardinals season is going to bring? I'm doing the Twitter polls, and I'm going to put out another one after I finish recording this podcast, where I know people are, like, they're more pessimistic because it's been like 57% on the over even before we got to 81 wins. But then I keep doing these damn polls, and it's still 57%. You guys aren't relenting. So when do we get into the mid-80s and see people really drop their confidence level to below 50% that the Cardinals are going to win X number of games? We'll find out at bschaefer12 on Twitter. I'm going to do a poll like every 2 hours so I can try and finish the series before first pitch happens this afternoon. But that is going to do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and comment below. Thank you guys so much. We will talk to you next time on Be Safe Daily. Peace.